Well, good morning, everyone. I thought it a little bit ironic this morning that somebody who's clearly not wet-shaved in a very long time was getting people to shave up there. The irony was not lost on me on that. And as well, I'm going to share this too, that I would beware of your Peppa Pig book as well, because I happened to walk into the lounge this morning when one of my children was watching Peppa Pig, and it was a Father's Day episode, and they'd forgotten Father's Day, and Peppa said to her mother, "Is Father's Day like Mother's Day?" And I kid you not, the mum replied, "Yes, kind of, but Mother's Day is the real one." So, but having watched that video, maybe that is true. And I often notice as well sometimes the bad habits that my children pick up. So for instance, I've often, when one of them gets something wrong or it doesn't go quite as they write, you just hear them go, "Oh, come on!" That's me. I do that. They're picking up my habits. Or the youngest one standing at the bottom of the stairs and shouting up, "Dinner's ready, boys. Get down here now." That's me. So they've picked up some of my bad habits. Hopefully, as a father, they're picking up some good habits as well. But we are continuing our series, Mission Possible, thinking about why and how we share our faith. And today we're going to look at love in action, and we're going to think a little bit about how we can pick up Jesus' habits, who I'm sure only had good habits, how we can mimic Jesus and his life and what that means for the world around us. But before I go any further, let's just pray. Lord, as we leave here today, would we show love in action? Lord, I thank you that this morning we worshipped you and we've encountered you. Would you be the spark in us? Would you open our hearts and minds to hear your word this morning? Amen. I don't know, but do you remember doing something for the first time? Doing it for the first time on your own and having that feeling of kind of nervousness, but feeling freedom. Maybe it was when you learned to drive for the first time and you got out in the car on your own. I don't know if you were kept to the speed limit or you thought, there's no instructor, I can put my foot down now. But that's one of those moments of going out alone, but it's kind of nerve-wracking. Or maybe, I don't know, can you remember as far back as when you learned to ride a bike and the feeling of on a bicycle and there's no stabilizers and there's no parent running alongside you trying to catch you? Well, I used to do quite a bit of rock climbing, and there's something called lead climbing. And that means there's not a rope above you, but as you go up, you clip your rope into the rock as you go up. But it means you can be, if you've clipped your rope here, it means you can be up here and fall past your last point of protection. Hopefully you won't hit the ground, but it's just a bit more freeing way of climbing and means you can get out at the top. And the first time I did this, it was scary, but it felt freeing. But I was a little bit over-ambitious in what I chose to climb. And I got to this point, there was a ledge, and I was kind of on one hand and two knees, and you should never be on your knees when you're rock climbing, stay on your feet. And I'm trying to reach up for this hold that I can't reach because I'm on my knees. And apparently, I don't remember saying this, but the person who was holding my rope at the bottom kind of heard a pitiful, "Help me." So that was one of my stories of trying something for the first time. And I wonder, this is the disciples going out for the first time, the story that was read today. That's the disciples going out on their own. They don't have Jesus with them in that moment. He sends them out. And he sends them out on their own. And he sends them out with a mission. And today we're going to think about being sent out. We're going to think about love in action. And I'm going to break it down into three things. I don't always like to preach a three-point sermon, but here you go. We're going to think about being with Jesus, becoming like Jesus, and doing the things that Jesus did. And his disciples got to be with Jesus. They got to be with Jesus in the flesh, in person. And they got to experience the love of Jesus firsthand there. But that meant that they could then go and share that love with others. You see, John, who was one of the disciples, who was one of the ones who got sent out by Jesus, later wrote a letter that's towards the end of the Bible. And in 1 John 4:19, he says, we love because he first loved us. We show love because we first received love, because we have first encountered the source of love. And Jesus in Matthew 10 and verse 8 says, give freely because you've been given freely. We have received a free gift, and we've received a free gift for a purpose. We've received a free gift so that we can give it out. Now, this is not just Jesus doing his own thing and going his own way. This is Jesus following the Old Testament pattern. The children of Israel were supposed to be a light to the nations. They were supposed to be an example to all the countries and the people round about, and show them what God was like. And in Isaiah chapter 1, verse 17, it tells us something of what they were meant to be like. It says, learn to do right, seek justice, defend the oppressed, take up the cause of the fatherless, and plead the case of the widow. They were supposed to show love in action. They were supposed to show the love of God to the people around them. And it's also significant that Jesus sent out 12, because that harks back to the 12 tribes of Israel. But also, 12 in the Bible has a significance. The number 12 and multiples of 12 signify all God's people. This isn't just those 12 people going out. This is Jesus saying, all God's people, this is the job of everybody, is to show love in action. And these disciples had followed a very simple process to get to this moment of being sent out. They got to watch what Jesus was doing. They got to learn from him, and they got to do it. They got to learn, watch, and do. A very simple process. In Matthew 5-7, they got to learn from Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount. He explains his manifesto of his new kingdom, he explains what God's love in the world looks like. And then in Matthew chapter 8 and 9, they got to watch Jesus doing ministry. He healed people. He served people. And then you get to chapter 10 and he's like, right, now it's your go. They were probably a little bit scared. I don't think they probably would have gone, help me. You see, we are all called to show God's love in action. All God's people, all Jesus' followers are called to show God's love in action. In Matthew 28, before Jesus went back to heaven, he said, he sent everybody to go in what we call the Great Commission. He said, go into all the world and make disciples. Tell people about me. Share the good news. Show love in action. We get to come and be with Jesus. We've got to be with Jesus this morning and encounter him. But we got to come here and be with Jesus for a purpose. Because when we go out there, it is all of us. We all have callings on our life, but we all have one or two in common, and one of them is to show God's love in action. We come here so we can be built up. And throughout our lives, we need those spiritual rhythms, spending time with Jesus so that we can give out. We get to be with Jesus so that we can show love in action. So we get to be with Jesus, but we also need to become like Jesus. In Matthew 9, verse 36, it says that Jesus had compassion on them. All through the New Testament, there are moments where Jesus had compassion on people. And the dictionary says that compassion, basically it describes it as a feeling of sympathy, and describes it as an emotional thing. But actually, the root of the word compassion is about entering into suffering, entering into the suffering of other people. One of my spiritual heroes is somebody called Jackie Pullinger. Some of you may have heard her. She is a missionary to Hong Kong, particularly, and she felt a call from God to go abroad, and it was in a time and in a context where it was not seen as the right thing to do for women to go out into the mission field on their own. But she went, and she ended up in Hong Kong, and she went to the walled city, which was largely closed off from any kind of police and government. It was a very dangerous place to be, run by gangs. And she went there, and she had compassion on the drug addicts and those in poverty, and on the gang members in that. You see, her compassion led to action. She entered into their suffering. For me, I used to help in a food bank, and I just went along originally because they needed help there. But I had compassion on the people there. I got to sit down and talk to these people, some of whom you wouldn't expect to be in food poverty and certain situations. I got to have tea and coffee with the people, talk to them, get to know them more and more, pray with the people in certain circumstances, and there were times when I could be part of the team picking the food, giving them food, and even helping them carry the food home. In that moment, going to the food bank, God broke my heart, and I had compassion on the people who were there. In Matthew 10, verses 6 to 8, we see that is full of action words doing. If we could have it up a little bit longer, please. There is go, proclaim, heal, raise, cleanse, drive out. Jesus had compassion on the people. His disciples were with him. They got to be with him, and they had compassion, and things happened. When Jesus had compassion on people, people got fed. When Jesus had compassion on people, they got healed. When Jesus had compassion on people, he went to a cross and took all the consequences for the sin of the world and everything that is wrong in the world. When Jesus had compassion, he entered into the suffering. And it was the same in the book of Acts. When his followers had compassion on people, things happened. And for us, the challenge is there. We are being called to become like Jesus. Who do we have compassion on? Who is God breaking our heart for? Now, some of you, God has broken your heart for a cause, for a people group, for a person, and you're out there and you're showing loving action, you're entering into the suffering with them. But for some of us, we're thinking, I feel bad about situations, but I don't think I'm entering into the suffering. We need to ask God to break our heart for someone, some people, for something. Who are we going to enter into? Whose suffering are we going to enter into? To who are we going to show love in action? The simple way to find out is who we have compassion on is like me. Maybe try something, try a few things. What does God break your heart for? We can also prayerfully watch the news, read the newspaper, look at the world out there. Who do we have compassion on? You see, as we become like Jesus, we start to show love in action. So, to show love in action, we need to be with Jesus. We need to become like Jesus, but we need to do the things that Jesus did. And there's two very, very obvious and very simple things that the disciples did when they went out. They met the needs of people, and they built relationships with people. In verses 7 and 8, we saw that they cleanse people of leprosy, they heal people, they get involved with people. They see that people have practical, physical, and spiritual needs, and they get involved in all of those things. You see, we have a God who is interested in people's lives, who wants the best for people. We have a God who is making all things new, who is calling us to bring his kingdom out there. There are people who are struggling with money. There's people who are struggling with illness. There's people who are struggling in abusive situations. That I could go on and on. There's a huge list. And like the disciples, we're being called to find out what those needs are and meet those needs. And they also built relationships. They put themselves in a vulnerable situation. They went to find out where they could stay. They put themselves at the mercy of other people. And often in sharing faith and showing love in action, maybe we feel like we're imposing ourselves. We may feel like we're being a bit silly or going to be looked down on in some way. But the way to build a relationship is putting ourselves out there. We need to meet people's needs and build relationships. I have worked with young people and students for quite a few years and felt that God was drawing me particularly to the university here in High Wycombe, and tried to push some doors to see if I could get involved in any way, and I managed to meet some people who work with students, and that's led me to be meeting a couple of students as well before they run off for the holidays. But I found out that actually God was leading me there for a purpose, I think, because there's not a strong Christian presence among the student population. There are Christians trying to work there, and there's certain particularly things that students are struggling with there. There's food prices are going up. It's a struggle for students. And mental health, particularly younger people and in the university, is quite a big thing. So for me, I've managed to start building some relationships, and I've managed to find out what the needs are, and I'm praying that God will use me in that situation to be able to help in some sort of way. But it doesn't have to be as big as that. It could be meeting somebody in a one-to-one situation or something else like that. What are people's needs around you? How can you develop those relationships? In St. Andrews, we have various ways that we try to meet people's needs that you can come and try. There's obviously the noise that happened here recently, going out into the community. The disciples, when they went out, didn't ask for anything. They gave away freely, and that's what I love about the noise. It gives away freely, going into people's houses and painting rooms and going and clearing gardens, opening up the church, and just a real sense of fun and God's kingdom in this building is amazing. So that's one thing. One of the other things we do is Alpha, so people who don't know God have an opportunity to come and ask questions. There's a family support group. There's Starlight for toddlers, and there's a lot of single mothers come to that. There's organizations in the town that we support. There's Azalea that works with women who are being sex trafficked. There is One Can that helps with food poverty. There's Wycombe Homeless Connection. There's loads of things that this church particularly is involved in showing love in action that we can get involved with. But the needs are even bigger than that out in High Wycombe. Loneliness. This was voted the loneliest town in the UK. Loneliness is a huge thing. And like we've mentioned, there is a growing number of people who need the food bank. There are people trapped in abusive relationships. There's a huge language barrier in this town as well for sharing the good news of Jesus. And there's refugees who live here as well who need people's support. The needs of this town are huge. The needs of your neighbours, your communities, your clubs are huge. But we are also called not to just think about our locality. We're called to think about the world beyond as well. And Mike spoke a couple of weeks ago about world mission. And the needs of the world are huge. Those affected by climate emergency. 1 billion people or more living in slums worldwide. People trapped in wars. People without clean drinking waters. And again, I'm just scratching the top of the surface. We live in a world that has so many needs. And we have a role to play in that. Now, we can't solve every problem. We're not going to solve every problem. And when Jesus comes back, he will solve every problem. Don't worry. But there's something we can do in our situations and in our context. And I think there's two very easy things that nearly all of us can do as we go out from here. Practice prayer and practice hospitality. Practice prayer and practice hospitality. The easiest way to start showing love in action. We can pray that God would break our heart for someone or something. Pray that God would break into our lives. And it's also really easy to offer to pray for someone else. Very rarely do people refuse to be prayed for. At the very least, people think it a nice gesture. But also practice hospitality. It doesn't mean putting on the biggest banquet in your house. It means putting yourself out there for others, making yourself vulnerable for other people. The root of hospitality is about welcoming strangers. It's about going and seeing other people, putting yourself at the mercy of other people. And as I've already alluded to, we can rest in the knowledge that God has got this. When we're a follower of Jesus, we're part of an eternal plan. Jesus says in Revelations that he is making all things new. We now get to be part of little glimpses of what that kingdom is like by showing love in action. But one day, it will all be perfect. There will be no pain and suffering. And we get to show people now a little glimpse of what that was like and helpfully bring them a little closer to him. So that there are so many problems in the world, and this can sound really scary, and we don't know what to do next. But I would encourage you to practice prayer and practice hospitality as you go. We get to be with Jesus. We get to learn from him. We get to see his heart. We get to become like Jesus, and he gives us compassion for other people. And we get to do the things that Jesus did. We get to be part of his kingdom, part of seeing his kingdom come in the world. Amen.